Hello! Welcome to this, special episode of Romney's Reviews. Now, I'm trying something a little bit different here because, I've fallen incredibly behind. Between my last review and this episode, I've seen 3 films, and it's been harder to actually find time to record these and edit them, so I decided to do it in more of a podcast format, and I'm basically going to try to keep editing minimal as possible. So if you want to kind of tab over to something while this is playing in the background, that's perfectly fine. I'm not going to do too much with the visuals. So really, I'm just going to talk about the 3 films I've seen. And if you are really itching for time to figure out any particular review, I'll have the time codes in the annotations on the video. And if you're watching this on your phone, I'll be sure to include those time codes in the description below. So with that said, let's start with the first film that I saw. Now, this one I went to a late night showing at the local art house theater that's near my work. And so, pretty late, had the theater by myself. It was just me and my dad. And the film we saw was The 33. Now, I was in high school when the story of the Chilean miners trapped in the Atacama Desert was on international news. However, being the apathetic, self-centered teenager I was back then, I didn't really pay attention, and I only really remember it because of the year-in-review YouTube games that the Fine brothers used to make before their whole channel became centered around watching people react to things. As such, it's pretty safe to assume that I'm looking at this through the lens of someone who's probably never heard of the story before, and I'm more looking at this as a film telling a story than I am as a film that's adapting a real event. Now, we're given 2.5 stories here as we bounce between the perspectives of the miners trapped underground, the Minister of Mining working to get them out, and the miners' families who are more or less left in the background. Now, there were 2 main things that bothered me while I was watching this film. Firstly, it just never really seemed to find its own style. It just felt like it kept trying to copy other quote-unquote inspirational films, to the point where the moments that are supposed to be dramatic just feel forced. Now, part of that may be attributed to the fact that its thinly spread plot tries to cover too many bases at once. If this were a mini-series that was at least 5 or 6 hours, then they could have covered all the details effectively. But here, the story they're trying to tell is just too big for just a 2-hour runtime. Now, there was one really, really good scene in this film that occurs towards the end of the second act. The miners are trapped underground. They're eating the very, very last of their food. And I don't know if it's like a hallucination or kind of a flashback, but they kind of start thinking about all the food that they would eat back home and the family members they long to see. And it was a really well done scene as you kind of see like reality and fantasy kind of blur a little bit. And it's kind of a nice, heartwarming scene that probably would have made for a very good short film in and of itself. And it was the only time that I feel the film was taking on an identity of its own, as you see like each of the characters kind of think about the foods and the people, and I especially like the scene where they had in like the cow, and just the way that scene ends is very nice and poignant. And it's like the only unique thing about this film that actually felt unique, original. It actually had its own style. However, this leads me to the other problem that I have with this film, and that is the fact that it doesn't keep its languages consistent. Look, I get when you're an American studio making a film about a foreign country, it's natural to have your main cast of characters speaking English, as the film is being made for a US audience. As such, having performances of Chilean music in the native language may put a strain on that suspension of disbelief. Now, with music, it's forgivable. Translating the words into English while still having it sung by the actors is difficult. I get that. However, when you have a known Chilean personality like Don Francisco recreating a newscast in his native language, while at the same time having all of the characters who are supposed to be native Chileans speaking English, you're not just putting a strain on the suspension of disbelief, you're breaking it. And I mean, I get it, you're trying to be as accurate as possible, and I get that Don Francisco probably didn't really speak English, but that kind of consistency is important. I mean, yeah, it may seem like a bit of a nitpick, but it's important, because it helps the suspension of disbelief. And by having Don Francisco, like, coming on screen, speaking in Spanish, it just left me wondering, well, then why isn't this film in Spanish? Because it's set in Chile, all the characters are supposed to be native Chileans, except for the one Bolivian, and yet they're all speaking English. It just doesn't make any sense. When it comes to the film's technical aspects, it's fairly impressive, particularly when we watch the events unfold in the mine. They also took a lot of great care to make a lot of the equipment look as believable as possible. As for the music, it tries to work in the same type of score we see in disaster and survival films, while also being quick to remind us that it's a story set in a South American country. At some points, like that really good scene from the second act, it works, But for the most part, it just doesn't gel all that well. Like, it tries to do the very dramatic score, but then it'll work in the Chilean music, but it'll feel too jarring. It doesn't actually feel like the two musical aspects of the film are actually part of the same score. It just felt like somebody did a sloppy edit in iMovie. The acting is one of the film's saving graces, as we get really good performances from the ensemble cast. The believability of the characters is about the only thing this film has going for it. Overall, this film is noble in its intent, but flawed in its execution. The story is spread too thin, and the linguistic inconsistency really bothers me. There are moments of greatness, like that one scene where they're all trapped in the mine towards the end of the second act that I keep mentioning. For the most part, the film tries a little too hard to be the dramatic, inspirational film we always see around this time of year, instead of letting the story be inspirational in and of itself. It's an okay film, it's just, it has its flaws, and its flaws are really hard to ignore. It had that really, really good scene, but everything surrounding it just didn't really work. Now, my theory is that since none of the miners actually died during the whole incident, they had to kind of stretch their brains a little bit to try to figure out, okay, how can we make this dramatic? But they tried a little too hard to make it dramatic without letting the actual drama of being trapped underground speak for itself. I mean, I don't know all the details, I don't know how accurate the film is to all the details, although having the last little bit where they actually showed what the miners actually looked like at the end of the film was a nice touch. It was just trying too hard to be something that it really shouldn't have tried to be. So, the 33 gets a 3 out of 5. With that, we move on to the second film I saw, The Good Dinosaur. Now, I saw this on a Sunday with my mom during the weekend after Thanksgiving. I couldn't do my Black Friday double feature because, well, bought a Wii U and kind of was playing with it, and really, that's where my weekend went. And so I went on a Sunday when the weather and the traffic wasn't really as bad and saw it with my mom. So, you kind of notice the theme here. This Pixar film had to be pushed down a year due to unexplained, unconfirmed details regarding production, and Inside Out basically got pushed up, and really, the fact this film had a 1-year delay really shows here. I mean, as much as I love Pixar, I have to acknowledge that the company has made some missteps in the past. Missteps that still somehow net them the Best Animated Feature awards due to rampant nepotism, but missteps nonetheless. Point being, nobody's batting 1,000, and Pixar is no different. With this film, I get the feeling that they had the initial concept, but they couldn't really find something to serve as the story's heart. As a result, we're given something that just feels half-formed, littered with ideas that would have worked better as separate shorts, and themes that just aren't really explored in any meaningful way. This causes the film to have a lot of moments of pathos, scenes where side characters are more or less trying to summarize the point of a film. This happens a total of 3 times with 3 different messages. Is this film about overcoming your fears? Is it about not judging things based on their initial appearances? Is it about having a meaningful impact on the people around you? I understand that a film can have multiple themes, but here they're also overt to the point that it just feels crowded. It's like the film doesn't really know what it's about, and so it's just trying to hammer in messages as much as possible so that it seems like it has a point when it doesn't really. There are some good scenes here and there, but the film as a whole just feels unfocused. Visually, it looks pretty good. I like the expansive Rocky Mountain vistas we're given, and I also like the subtle touches in character design, but that's pretty much par for the course at Pixar at this point. Overall, this is just not one of Pixar's best, as the story is too unfocused, like they thought of the idea of a boy and a dinosaur, but couldn't decide what to do with it. It really irks me to say this, but Ice Age did it better. Yeah, there weren't any dinosaurs, but in terms of the overall journey that the characters take, Ice Age just has a more satisfying conclusion, while The Good Dinosaur just ends, leaving you in a state of confusion. It's sad that I got more enjoyment out of the short film, Sanjay's Super Team, than I did of the entire feature. It's just, this film felt like it was trying so hard to find its message, because each Pixar film has some sort of message or theme it's trying to explore, but this film didn't really have that. I mean, it's not about family, it's not about overcoming fears, and the whole making a mark, that just felt really forced, and even by the end of the film, just like, okay, what was the point of that? So really, in terms of the bad Pixar films I've seen, I'd say this is like a little bit worse than Brave, because while Brave had somewhat of a point that just wasn't well thought out, here, it meanders. That's the simplest way to put it. This is a film that meanders in too many different directions, that it's clear that the people making it just couldn't think of anything to do with a boy and his dinosaur. I mean, I understand the idea. It's like, oh, it's supposed to be a twist in the whole boy and his dog sort of story. But even as a survival story, it's not that good. At one point, it's trying to be like Little House on the Prairie. At another point, it's trying to be Hatchet. As such, The Good Dinosaur also gets a 3 out of 5. With that, we move on to the third film I saw this week, and that was Creed. Now, full confession here, I've never actually seen any of the Rocky films all the way through. I've seen bits and pieces here and there through the numerous television airings that Ion Television is particularly fond of, especially whenever they do their Rocky marathons. As such, I don't have as much nostalgia attached to the franchise as a whole. However, it appears with this film, you don't really need to be a Rocky fan to enjoy it. Now, this film was a real refreshment to watch after having seen The 33 and The Good Dinosaur, and it's also equally refreshing to see a film that actually makes use of the language of cinema, something I haven't really been seeing in films as of late. There's a great deal of narrative depth in the cinematography of this film that is both subtle and effective. The symbolism and the subtext is there if you can find it, but it doesn't call attention to itself. The same thing could be said about the story as a whole. It acknowledges that it's part of the Rocky franchise, but makes an effort to stand on its own, which works in tandem with the key theme of the film, as our main character Adonis wrestles with the unwanted legacy of his father Apollo Creed. As such, we're presented with a film that is raw and intense, but also possesses a strong heart. While it does reuse key aspects of the classic Rocky formula, it does it in a way that gives it a modern twist that gives us something new, as evidenced by the film's orchestral theme that uses measures from Bill Conti's Gonna Fly Now to create a whole new song complete with a different cheering choir. It's similar to the classic Rocky theme, but it's also different at the same time, where it feels new and different. It's a twist on it, and it actually is a really good twist on it, showing that, yeah, this is part of a longer legacy, but Creed can stand on his own. He's not trying to be like the next Rocky. He's not trying to be like his dad. He's basically fighting to stand on his own. And that's what I really like about this one, that everything just works with that key theme. And that's why I really enjoyed this film. I mean, the story is really engaging, the action was intense, and the cinematography was one of the best uses of cinematic language, of cinematic symbolism that I have seen in quite some time, because it's rare nowadays to actually see a film where the filmmaker is putting that much thought into their imagery. I mean, I could probably even do a whole cinematography breakdown on a lot of the symbolism used in the cinematography that you probably wouldn't even normally think about when you first saw it, but the only reason I noticed it is because, well, I've been studying film for a little under a decade now, but point being, this was an incredible film. It took something that most people would deem cliche and made it fresh and new, and it's sure to please old school Rocky fans and newcomers alike. I mean, I cannot recommend this film highly enough. It is just that amazing. The cinematography is good, it has really intense action, it's written and paced really well. It's just an amazing film. As such, the one highlight of this chain of films I've seen gets a 5 out of 5. So that's it for this little experimental episode of Romney's Reviews. Let me know what you think about the format in the comments. Let me know if I should go back to the old format, which may be easier now that I've kind of cleaned the slate in terms of reviews I needed to do. But if you like this format, let me know in the comments below. But in the meantime, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.